This week marks the 45th anniversary of the historic Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. It's a decision that made abortion legal, but there are major concerns that we may not see a 50th anniversary. Many red states are already trying to whittle away women's rights to choose, and the High Court, it is turning right and will get even more conservative if President Trump gets to appoint another justice. That could put the whole thing literally in jeopardy. I recently sat down with Linda Greenhouse. She's a distinguished journalist in residence at Yale Law School. She's also covered the Supreme Court for the New York Times for nearly 30 years. Before we talk about where we are on this anniversary as it relates to Roe v. Wade, there was some news. The president was the first president to attend the March for Life just a couple days ago, and he also made a specific ask of Congress, more specifically the Senate, in saying that he wanted them to basically outlaw abortions after 20 weeks. Both the importance of the president attending that rally that others had avoided, and also the significance 45 years later of now trying to further limit Roe v. Wade.
Of course, the question at the 45th anniversary of Roe is whether there's going to be a 50th anniversary of Roe. And this administration is trying its best to have that answer to that question be no. So far it's a lot of symbolism, plus one new justice. That justice, of course, replaced Justice Scalia, who was probably the strongest opponent of Roe on the court. So that hasn't changed much. We've got so far a fair amount of verbiage, and that's it.
He also talked about expanding the global gag rule. For the audience who's not familiar with what that is, could you explain that?
Yes, that was a very unfortunate and aggressive action that President Trump took soon after his inauguration. The policy, the so-called global gag rule, cuts off any federal money to any international NGO that does anything other than flatly oppose abortion. So any organization, not one that performs abortion, there's been no federal money for performing abortion for many, many years, that even refers women or informs women that abortion is an option in their case, abortion is a better option in their case of medical need and so on. The organizations have to forswear any discussion of abortion in order to be eligible for federal money.
You mentioned before, I think it's the question, the right one to ask, which is on this anniversary 5 years from now, will Roe v. Wade still be on the books as settled law? Let's do this in three parts. Remind everybody 46 years ago in this country where we were, and before that law came down, what was the reality for women with unwanted pregnancies in this country?
So 46 years ago, abortion was illegal in the great majority of the states. Not in New York, where the legislature had repealed the old criminal abortion law. Not in California, where the state Supreme Court had declared that criminal abortion law unconstitutional. Handful of other states. So the situation really was that middle-class women, women of means, could find their way to a safe abortion, even if one that wasn't legal. The impact was felt by women in poverty, women of color, who were relegated to the back alleys. There was estimated 500,000 illegal abortions a year in the years leading up to Roe against Wade. Abortion has always been a very common practice. It's one of the most common medical practices that exist. So criminalization wasn't stopping abortion by any means, but it was creating great economic disparity and medical risk.
So then you fast forward, and 45 years after it became the law of the land, you would have thought it'd be more settled, but in many ways, what is the reality as it relates to both access and also restrictions today?
A bunch of red states following a playbook put out by an anti-abortion organization in Chicago called Americans United for Life, very effective advocacy group, have done their best to shut down access to abortion by putting onerous restrictions on clinics and on and on providers. There are some states where there's only one provider, for example, and with onerous waiting periods that are simply designed to stigmatize the procedure and stigmatize women who choose abortion. So they may have to drive long distances, get the Riot Act read to them, a script read to them, have to drive home, because many, many women who have abortions already have families and have children at home. So access is quite difficult in many areas, but yet abortion obviously fills a great need in the lives of women who need to control their reproductive lives, and roughly 25 to 30% of all women in America will have an abortion at some time during their reproductive life, and this is something that cannot be brought to an end by legislation.
To that end, Linda, if the Supreme Court is going to re-examine portions of Roe v. Wade, or even potentially more broadly the law itself, under what guise do you think, and do you think there's an appetite with this court to take it on?
On the current court, there are 5 votes to sustain the right to abortion. The most recent case was in 2016, a case called Whole Woman's Health from Texas, in which the court then, by a vote of 5-3, because Justice Scalia was not on the court and there was a vacancy, by a vote of 5-3, struck down some quite preposterous restrictions that the state of Texas had imposed on abortion providers. So it's still, it's 5-4. You know, everybody says it's all hanging on Justice Kennedy, and that's become almost a cliche, but it's basically true. So it kind of depends on who controls the Senate. The next time there's a Supreme Court vacancy, the future of the right to abortion hangs on that.
So bringing it full circle to the very question you asked off the top, 5 years from now, really the future of Roe v. Wade could depend on the health of Kennedy or any other justice for that matter, and who basically gets to appoint his or her successor.
Well, that's right, because the anti-abortion side is very determined. It speaks for a minority. There's a clear majority in this country for keeping abortion legal, at least in some circumstances. It really depends in part on the 2018 election, because that group speaks for a base that's very powerful, even though it's, as I say, it's not a majority. So it's all a matter of our domestic politics that will control the future of the Supreme Court, that will control the future of the constitutional right to abortion.
Well, Linda, along with the partner, wrote a really fascinating piece in the Yale Law Journal before and after Roe v. Wade, new questions about backlash, and we've linked that. Linda, I certainly appreciate a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we'll take a look at some local headlines, so please stay with us.